Have you ever met someone who made you feel like you had finally found your missing piece? Someone who walked into your life and within days or weeks seemed to understand you better than anyone else ever had? Everything felt electric. Every text made your heart race. Every moment apart felt unbearable. You told yourself it had to be love because nothing had ever felt this intense before. But what if that intensity wasn't love at all? What if the very thing you believe proves the relationship is special is actually the biggest warning sign you've been ignoring? Today we're going to uncover a truth that most people don't realize until years later. A trauma bond doesn't just imitate love, it hijacks the same emotional systems your brain uses to create attachment. And that's exactly why walking away can feel impossible. Think about the last time someone hurt you deeply, but somehow became the same person you ran to for comfort. Doesn't that sound strange? If someone causes pain, shouldn't you naturally want to get away from them? That's what logic says. But trauma bonds don't operate on logic. They operate on survival. Your nervous system begins associating relief with the very person creating the distress. It's like someone holding your head underwater and then letting you breathe just long enough to convince you they're saving your life. The problem is, they were the one drowning you in the first place. Yet your brain remembers the relief, not the manipulation. That's why so many intelligent, emotionally aware people stay in relationships they know are hurting them. It's not because they're weak, it's because their biology has been rewired. This cycle often begins so subtly that you don't even notice it happening. First comes overwhelming affection, constant attention, endless compliments, deep conversations that make you believe you finally found someone who truly sees you. Then, almost without warning, things begin to shift. Messages become colder. Affection becomes inconsistent. You start wondering what changed. Instead of questioning their behavior, you question yourself. Did I say something wrong? Am I asking for too much? Maybe they're just stressed. Without realizing it, you've already entered the cycle. Every small moment of affection now feels like a reward you've earned instead of something freely given, and every cold moment feels like a punishment you desperately want to escape. Here's where things become dangerous. Human beings are wired to chase unpredictability. Casinos know this. Social media knows this. Video game designers know this. Variable rewards create stronger addictions than consistent ones. The same principle applies to unhealthy relationships. When love is always available, it feels safe. But when love appears randomly, your brain becomes obsessed with earning it again. Every tiny sign of affection releases dopamine, making you crave the next emotional high even more. That's why leaving doesn't feel like walking away from love. It feels like giving up the chance to experience that incredible high one more time. Many people mistake emotional intensity for emotional intimacy, but these are completely different things. Intensity is fast. It consumes you. It makes your world shrink until the relationship becomes everything. Intimacy is slow. It grows through consistency, trust, honesty, and emotional safety. Trauma bonds create chaos and call it passion. Healthy love creates peace, and people who've only experienced chaos often mistake that peace for boredom. Isn't that fascinating? Sometimes the healthiest relationship you've ever experienced can initially feel less exciting, simply because your nervous system isn't being thrown into survival mode every single day. Have you ever noticed how people trapped in trauma bonds constantly replay the good memories? They remember the vacations, the laughter, the promises, the apologies, and those rare moments when everything seemed perfect. Meanwhile, the insults, the manipulation, the silent treatments, and the emotional exhaustion somehow fade into the background. This isn't because they're lying to themselves. It's because the brain naturally clings to hope when it believes survival depends on maintaining attachment. Hope becomes addictive. You stop asking whether the relationship is healthy and start asking how to get back to the version of them you met in the beginning. But here's the painful reality. That version may never have truly existed. In many unhealthy relationships, the early stage isn't the real person finally showing you who they are. It's a carefully maintained performance designed to create emotional dependence. Once that dependence is established, consistency disappears because it no longer serves the same purpose. You're already emotionally invested. You're already believing that if you just love them enough, they'll become that amazing person again. And that's exactly what keeps the cycle alive. One of the biggest myths about trauma bonds is that they only happen in abusive relationships involving obvious violence. That's simply not true. Emotional manipulation can create the same powerful attachment. Constant criticism followed by affection, repeated promises followed by disappointment, making you feel responsible for their emotions, convincing you that nobody else would ever understand you, slowly isolating you from people who genuinely care about you. These patterns don't leave visible bruises, but they reshape the way you see yourself. Over time, your confidence begins to disappear. You stop trusting your own judgment because you've been taught that your feelings are always the problem. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is this. Deep down, you often know something isn't right. You feel anxious more than peaceful. You overthink every conversation. You celebrate basic respect because it's become so rare. Yet whenever you consider leaving, another voice appears inside your head. What if they really change this time? What if this relationship is worth fighting for? What if I'll never find someone who makes me feel this deeply again? That voice isn't always speaking from love. Sometimes it's speaking from fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of starting over, fear of losing the emotional identity you've built around trying to save someone who never asked to be saved. The truth is, trauma bonds don't just change the way you see another person, they change the way you see yourself. Little by little, your identity becomes tied to the relationship. You stop asking, who am I outside of this? Instead, your thoughts revolve around fixing problems, preventing arguments, decoding mixed signals, and anticipating emotional shifts. You become hyper-aware of every facial expression, every delay in a text message, every subtle change in their tone of voice. It feels like love because they're constantly on your mind. But being unable to stop thinking about someone isn't proof of love. It's often proof that your nervous system never gets a chance to relax. Healthy love gives your mind room to breathe. Trauma bonds keep your brain permanently on high alert. This is why so many people describe the end of a trauma bond as feeling like withdrawal from a powerful drug. They're not exaggerating. Brain imaging studies have shown that romantic rejection activates many of the same reward pathways involved in addiction. Now imagine combining that with months or years of emotional inconsistency. Your brain has been trained to chase unpredictable rewards, and suddenly they're gone. The silence becomes unbearable. You don't miss only the person, you miss the chemical highs your brain associated with them. That's why so many people break no contact after just a few days. They mistake withdrawal for destiny. They assume that because it hurts so much, it must have been real love. In reality, pain alone doesn't prove something was healthy. It only proves that you became deeply attached. Have you ever wondered why friends and family often see the truth long before you do? They watch the relationship from the outside. They notice how often you cry. They notice how much you've changed. They remember how confident, funny, and relaxed you used to be. Meanwhile, you're focused on the tiny moments that give you hope. You're comparing today's behavior to yesterday's argument, instead of comparing the relationship to what genuine love should actually feel like. That's the trap. Trauma bonds lower your expectations so gradually that you don't even notice the standards disappearing. Imagine walking into a room where the lights slowly become dimmer every day. At first, you'd notice, but after weeks or months, your eyes would adjust. One day someone opens the curtains, and you're shocked by how dark the room had actually become. That's exactly what happens in emotionally unhealthy relationships. Your emotional vision adapts to dysfunction. Behaviors you once considered unacceptable slowly become normal. You celebrate apologies that are never followed by change. You become grateful for kindness that should have been there all along. The relationship teaches you to survive instead of thrive. One of the hardest questions you can ask yourself is surprisingly simple. If this person stayed exactly the way they are today for the next 10 years, would you still choose this relationship? Not the version you hope they'll become, not the version they were during the honeymoon phase, the version standing in front of you right now. That question forces you to separate reality from potential, and potential has trapped more people than almost anything else. You cannot build a healthy future based on who someone might become someday. You can only build it on who they consistently choose to be. Another sign that you're dealing with a trauma bond is how conflict feels. In healthy relationships, disagreements are uncomfortable, but they usually lead to understanding. In trauma bonds, conflict feels like the end of the world. Every argument threatens the entire relationship. Every disagreement creates panic. You feel compelled to fix everything immediately because you've learned that distance equals danger. You apologize even when you're not wrong. You abandon your own needs just to restore temporary peace. Eventually, you don't even recognize your own voice anymore because you've spent so much time protecting someone else's emotions. Here's something many people never hear. Love should make your life bigger, not smaller. It should strengthen your friendships, encourage your goals, and support your growth. Trauma bonds often do the opposite. Your world gradually becomes centered around one person. You stop pursuing hobbies. You cancel plans with friends. You become emotionally unavailable to the people who genuinely care about you because all your energy is consumed trying to keep one unstable relationship alive. Without realizing it, you've built your entire emotional world around someone who may never offer the stability you're searching for. So how do you begin breaking free? It starts by accepting a difficult truth. Closure doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes closure comes from finally seeing the pattern instead of chasing another explanation. You may never receive the apology you deserve. You may never hear them admit what they did. Waiting for that moment only gives them more control over your healing. Freedom begins when you stop asking them to validate your pain and start validating it yourself. The next step is learning to trust your body again. Your body often notices danger before your mind does. Think back to the relationship. How often did you feel anxious before they even said anything? How often did you struggle to sleep after arguments? How often did your stomach tighten every time your phone lit up? Your body was sending signals the entire time. The challenge is that trauma teaches us to ignore those signals. Healing means listening to them again. Recovery isn't about forgetting the relationship. It's about understanding it. Once you understand the cycle, it loses much of its power. You begin recognizing manipulation instead of calling it passion. You recognize consistency instead of mistaking it for boredom. You stop chasing emotional roller coasters because you finally realize peace isn't the absence of chemistry. It's the presence of safety. One day you'll meet people who don't make you question your worth. They won't disappear to test your loyalty. They won't make affection feel like something you have to earn. They won't leave you wondering where you stand every single day. At first, that kind of relationship may even feel unfamiliar. It may seem almost too calm. But that's because your nervous system is finally experiencing something it hasn't known in a very long time: security. If this message resonated with you, don't ignore that feeling. Sometimes the first step toward healing isn't leaving immediately. It's simply recognizing that what you've been calling love may actually be survival. Awareness is where every transformation begins. And once you see the pattern, it's almost impossible to unsee it. You deserve a relationship where peace doesn't have to be earned, where respect isn't conditional, and where love isn't confused with emotional pain. If this video helped you see your situation differently, make sure to subscribe, because understanding the psychology behind human relationships can change not only who you love, but also how you choose yourself. And that decision might be the most important one you'll ever make.